On a dark afternoon, 3 goblin children were playing at the markets, while their parents haggled over the prices of detonation cord and explosives. After a bit of showing off, the children began to argue. "I have 4 iron coins," the sassy one said. "Oh, that's nothing," the ill-tempered one bragged. "I have 5. The youngest goblin waved a handful of iron coins in the air. "I've got more than both of you." An old goblin with ready tail braids overheard the argument and stopped. She wagged a warning finger at the children. "Keep your voices down and your money in your pockets, or we know who might pay you a visit." As the old goblin continued on her way, she sang a nursery rhyme the young goblins knew well. "In dark of night and bright of day, keep in your hand a toss away. Guard your fortune, mind your greed, or else the uninvited guest will feed." The children heeded the warning and shoved their money back in their pockets, glancing around as if they could see the invisible creature even the bravest goblins feared. There was only one way to protect themselves and their meager fortunes. As the children ran off, they each threw a toss away behind them. Every smart goblin carried a few of these shiny gold discs stamped with the face of an ancient trade prince, but few knew the true story of their origin. It began with a trade prince, a gold waistcoat, and a funeral. It was an unpleasantly rainy winter day, and Klex Boom Powder's mood matched the weather. Normally, the trade prince of the Steamweeder cartel looked forward to funerals. What resourceful goblin wouldn't appreciate one less competitor and another slice of business up for grabs? But the funeral scheduled for this particular afternoon was an exception. Klex waited impatiently as the tailor at his feet hurriedly stitched the back of his gold lame waistcoat. If he was stuck attending a rival's funeral, the trade prince intended to look as wealthy as possible while doing it. Klex's wife, Slixy, noticed his foul expression. "Stop sulking," she said, before applying another coat of bright purple lipstick to match her straining silk bustier. "I'm not carrying that deadbeat's coffin," her husband announced. "I don't care what it says in his will. No self-respecting trade prince would carry a rival's death box. He cost me the rocket boot deal of a lifetime." Slixy narrowed her green eyes. "You will. You'll be sleeping in the bathtub," she shot back, arranging her ready teal braids on top of her head. "You ain't embarrassing me at the biggest shindig of the year." The day was off to a bad start, and it would only get worse. Hundreds of goblins stood in line to pay their respects to Richter Hawksnozzle, the late trade prince of the Bilgewater cartel. Everyone, from the bosses of the families in his cartel and their underlings, to the welders and shop owners. The cartel members and the common goblins waited in separate lines, and it wasn't difficult to tell them apart. The cartel line was a blur of shiny, glittering silk and huge gemstone rings adorning chubby fingers. The wealthier goblins flashed gold and silver smiles as they rested their hands on jeweled dragonhead canes. Some had brought crocodile suitcases, while others had butlers pushing wheelbarrows. When Klex arrived, he strode to the front of the cartel line. Of course, he took his time so the other goblins could appreciate his opulent attire. Slixy followed suit, waving to the crowd like an exalted queen. 2 butlers trailed behind them, carrying enormous Hydra hide steamer trunks. Klex tipped his chin to an older goblin wearing a glossy Arctic fur coat. "Rip Fizzle, it's been a long time." Liar Rip Fizzle flashed a phony metallic smile. "Not long enough, if you ask me." "Still doing the Gurubashi's dirty work?" Klex asked. "Sure, if that's what you call making a mint selling them pig iron blades. Then yeah, I'm rolling in it." "What did you bring for the coffin?" Klex asked innocently. Rip Fizzle gestured to the wheeled metal bathtub manned by his butler. "See for yourself, sucker." The contents of the bathtub wagon resembled the piles Slixy left behind after cleaning out her closets. A nondescript fur coat, strands of pearls in boring shades of cream and white, a mismatched silver tea service, boxes of sugared croissants and moonberry-filled pastry, and cases of honey wine. "Is that all you could find in the attic?" Klex taunted. "I should knock your teeth out for insulting me." Ripfizzle spat, shouldering his way to the viewing platform, determined to go first. A metal safety rail surrounded the perimeter of the coffin. A huge metal shipping container, previously used to transport goblin war machines around Azeroth, hammered into the familiar funeral shape. The late Trey Prince's body rested peacefully atop a mountain of riches, gold and true silver, gilded furniture and a gemstone-encrusted trampoline, luggage brimming with expensive suits and furs, custom swords and tools, barrels of ale and cases of champagne, all besides packages of sweets and prime cuts of meat. As tradition dictated, goblins were buried with the most valuable and favored possessions, so they could enjoy them at the everlasting party, the goblin afterlife. The only thing more important than being buried with one's possessions were the burial gifts bequeathed to the deceased by the other goblins. Gifts were a reflection of wealth and social standing. Klex's butlers emptied the Hydra-hide steamer trunks, tossing a plethora of goodies onto the heap. His gifts didn't cause any mouths to drop, and Ripfizzle stood by, smug with the knowledge that he and his rival had given virtually the same gifts, give or take a gilded toothpick or two. But Klex had saved the best gift for last. He removed a small something from his pocket, and before he tossed it onto the pile, he held the priceless object for all to see. The ancient gold coin gleamed, and everyone recognized the face of the grinning goblin stamped into the polished metal, the face of the first Trey Prince. The crowd sucked in a collective breath, and then the whispering began. Is it real? Where did it come from? How did Klex Boom Powder get it? If it is real, why would he give away such a rare treasure? No one had seen goblin galleons in ages, the once beloved currency, been lost to time and newer forms of barter. Ripfizzle pointed at the coin. You expect us to believe that's real? Klex held the coin out to him. It's real, alright. Liar Ripfizzle snatched the coin and scrutinized it. There was no mistaking the face of the first Trey Prince staring back at him. Still, Liar put it between his crooked teeth and bit down to be sure. Where'd you get it? Ripfizzle asked in awe. That's my secret, Klex said with a satisfied smile. He took the galleon, rubbed it between his palms dramatically, and tossed it into the opulent coffin. The goblins in the crowd gasped, watching the coin arc in the air and finally land on the deceased goblin's unnecessarily frilly shirts. They had no way of knowing that the coin was a fake. Klex had switched the real galleon for the worthless one resting on Hognozzle's body. He wasn't about to part with the precious treasure. He had spent years diving the underwater rock caves in search of the legendary coins. Slixy had mocked the excursions until the fateful day a year ago, when he had finally returned from the South Sea with 6 galleons. After the gifting ended, the lid of the enormous container was soldered shut. Klex and many others danced on top of it to usher the deceased onto the everlasting party as the other goblins watched. Normally, prominent goblins served a pallbearers at the head of the coffin, while goblins contractually obligated to serve as pack mules carried the rear. But even with thousands of goblins in attendance, Hognozzle's coffin wouldn't budge, and the Bilgewater cartel had to bring in cranes to place it in the cavernous hole at the burial site. Once Hognozzle was safely in the ground, the festivities truly began. It was common knowledge that a goblin funeral was nothing more than an excuse to throw a party with someone else footing the bill, and Klex was now the center of attention. The other goblins marveled as he gorged on the buffet. A pudding fountain, towers of iced goblin shortbread and funnel cake, roasted kebab and aged bear steaks and boar ribs smothered in cheesy sauces. But unbeknownst to Klex, he had attracted the attention of something else. The creature watched from the shadows. It wasn't a goblin, or a troll, or a gnome, elf, or orc. It was something unseen and unknowable. An uninvited guest waiting in the darkness. Unbridled greed had attracted the creature to the funeral. Greed so all-consuming that it yielded a breach in etiquette so great that it offended the dead and extended an irrevocable invitation to a guest no goblin would ever care to meet. Now the creature stalked the shadows, sensing the true nature of the funeral goers. in a way that allowed it to see beyond the limits of sight. If Klex's boom powder had known the creature was out there, perhaps he wouldn't have chosen the gold lame jacket or brought his finest Hydra hide steamer trunks. Perhaps he wouldn't have thrown a worthless painted gold galleon into the burial trove. Perhaps that would have saved him. But nobody will ever know, because that night, the creature, the uninvited guest that would become to known, followed him home. The uninvited crossed the threshold before the butler closed the door. Although, truth be told, it could have walked straight through the walls. It glided up the stairs and crossed the halls, only steps behind Klex. It lurked behind the door as he removed his waistcoat and tugged the rings of his pudgy green fingers. The creature sensed the greed that gripped Klex's thoughts that night as he settled beneath the covers. With a tired, satisfied grin, the goblin pictured a coffin filled with riches, and Richter Hawknozzle's corpse nestled amongst jewels and furs, silver goblets and gold bars. As Klexus closed his eyes that night, and visions of galleons and rare black pearls unfurled in his mind, the uninvited was there behind him, barely an inch away, its mouth open, feeding. With the goblin's every thought, the uninvited guest grew stronger and more powerful. But the creature would never get its fill. Its belly was a bottomless pit, an unfathomable black hole constantly gnawing with emptiness. Klex awoke the next morning, feeling right as rain. He went about his day as if nothing has happened. Slixy didn't notice anything different about him either. Not until his bruiser, Bang, arrived during lunch. "We've got a problem, boss," Bang said, dreading the Trade Prince's reaction. "The arms runners in Booty Bay are short again. What you want me to do?" "Don't worry about it," Klex said between bites of funnel cake. "The cartel has plenty of money." "Boss?" Bang stared, dumbfounded. Slixy stared at her husband with a creeping sense of unease. "You heard me." Klex waved him away. Forgiving a few debts felt strangely normal. Why not? The cartel had plenty of money after all. Bang would never challenge the Trade Prince. But later that day, when Klex failed to haggle over the price of a load of explosives the cartel delivered, the bruiser knew that something was terribly wrong. He alerted Slixy, but that was only the beginning. The next morning, Slixy caught Klex sorting through her jewelry. "I was thinking we should give away some of these," he said, holding up an armload of necklaces laden with twilight opals and black diamonds. Slixy gathered her necklaces and clutched them to her chest. "Have you lost your mind? What's wrong with you?" She couldn't see the invisible vortex of shadow slithering around her husband's body, curling around his neck and sliding into his ears. Klex felt a heaviness in his chest, but his thoughts were not his own. He shrugged off his wife's question and wandered off in search of other extravagance they didn't need. The uninvited moved with him, parasitic and constantly feeding. No one could see it writhing around the Trade Prince while he ate breakfast. During cartel meetings and as he slept, they couldn't see the way it smothered him, filling his orifices, then undulating out of them like swirling black liquids. The Trade Prince couldn't feel it either. Sometimes he felt a tugging deep in his belly, like the annoying nag of hunger, but then it would disappear as quickly as it had surfaced. Klex Boom Powder's behavior grew more erratic and unusual every day. One minute, he was forgiving loans and offering steep discounts, and the next, he was giving away Arctic furs and polished gems. His behavior confused the other goblins and alarmed the members of his cartel. The Trade Prince hadn't been in an accident, and he didn't look sick to the naked eye. What could cause such horrific conduct? Sane goblins did not offer discounts and give away their valuables. No one could see the creature consuming his thoughts of wealth before he was even conscious of having them. Slixy suspected another Trade Prince had arranged for a necromancer to put a curse on her husband. There was simply no other explanation. She sent Bang and cartel spies on a fact-finding mission to uncover the truth. While they were gone, the situation turned dire. At night, she heard Klex mumbling about freeing himself of the weight of their possessions. The next day, he began giving away their belongings. "We have more than we need," Klex explained, as he rooted through closets and streamer trunks for items to purge. Watch your mouth, she spat. Your shenanigans are disgrace to the cartel, and me. When her husband approached their personal vault, Slixy took matters into her own hands. She hit him over the head with a frying pan and knocked him out. It was for Klex's own good, she reasoned. He would send him to the poorhouse if he kept this up. She opened the vault and removed the remaining galleons. She had to protect the fortune from Klex until she found a way to break the mysterious spell she believed had been cast upon him. Slixy carried the galleons into the woods, careful to ensure that no one followed her. Once there, she dug a deep hole in the earth and buried the treasure. Her husband couldn't squander what he couldn't find, but any hope of uncovering the source of Klex's madness was extinguished. When Bang returned from his mission, he had nothing but bad news. There was no word of a spell against the Tree Prince. Only dark tales of poisonings and ancient hexes gone awry, and old legends about malevolent, otherworldly creatures that preyed on unsuspected beings. An aging troll told a tale about an invisible evil that fed on the living, sucking the souls of its victims dry and leaving them mad. Is it the same creature? Slixy wondered. Or a similar monster? No way to tell, unless you find the thing and lure it outside under the full moon, he said. It's the only way to see it, apparently. Unfortunately, the moon wasn't full that night. At dinner, Slixy sat across from her husband, who didn't touch his meal. She kept her gaze trained on him, watching his chest rise and fall in even breaths. A thick and an invisible trail of liquid shadow reached for Klex, encircling his neck in a suffocating cloud of blackness. Why aren't you eating? She demanded, dropping her fork with a clatter. The shadow pressed in tighter, attaching itself to the vertebrae in her husband's neck. I'm not hungry. The black shadow pulsed like a dark heartbeat. Why the hell not? She snapped. The uninvited snaked into Klex's ear. We always have so much food. Why not? Do not say share, Slixy shouted as she hurled the plate at the floor. Klex didn't even flinch when it smashed against the tile. In the days that followed, Klex's mood improved as his affliction worsened. Ridding himself of his possessions seemed to bring him what Slixy considered a disturbing sense of euphoria. If she turned her back for a minute, he was out the door and off to plunder something else. It was impossible to watch him every second, which was how he managed to slip out on a rainy afternoon with his pockets full of jewels. Slixy searched the entire house before she realized he was gone, and he had already given away most of the jewelry by the time that she found him in the market. She cornered him behind the blacksmith's tent. Why are you doing this? Just tell me the truth. Are you under a spell? Did you forget what our life was like before? The uninvited rummaged around in his head, searching for rogue thoughts of greed. I remember it perfectly, he said matter-of-factly. That's why I'm donating all this. Our greed was a prison. I'm setting us free. Slixy narrowed her eyes. Then I'd rather be in prison. An old goblin limped past them, and Klex shoved a necklace into the goblin's rucksack. Charity will fill us with joy, Slixy. Her stomach turned at the thought, and at the next one. What if I can't save my husband? Or myself? Days later, Slixy arrived home to find Klex missing, and her house completely empty inside. Not a sock or a loaf of bread to be found. She tore out of the house in a fit of rage. I'll kill Klex myself when I find him, she roared. Slixy found him wandering at the edge of town with a handful of stones. He had given away everything they owned, and now he was handing out stones as if they were as valuable as pearls. She tried to persuade him to return to the house, but he refused. It's not ours anymore, he explained as he walked towards the sunset. I gave it to Ripfizzle. Slixy never saw her husband again after that night. But Klex was wrong about one thing. He had left something behind at the house, even if he hadn't realized it. Slixy knew it the moment she set foot inside. That was when she felt it for the first time. An icy, slithering sensation that moved off the back of her neck. Her blood ran cold, and the truth hit her like a stone. The nameless, faceless creature preying on her husband. It hadn't gone with him. The uninvited guest was still in the house, and it was still hungry. Slixy ran from the front door and tore into the dark night, propelled by fear and desperation. She had nothing left, thanks to Klex. He had given away everything. Not everything, she whispered. And Slixy stumbled towards the woods, tripping over branches and vines. She found a spot and threw herself to the ground. She couldn't see the creature, but the chill on the back of her neck told her that it was out there watching her. She dug up the galleons with her bare hands as fast as she could and gathered them up in the bottom of her shirt. Her heart thudded in her chest as she rushed through the woods. Keep going, she thought, without knowing if she would truly be safe anywhere. As she ran past a gnarled tree, her foot caught on a root. She hurled through the air and hit the ground hard. A wave of dizziness hit her, and she had the sinking feeling that this was the end. When Slixy's head stopped spinning, she took a deep breath and glanced behind her. The coins were scattered across the road, and it looked as if they were moving. Impossible. She must have hit her head harder than she thought. She looked back again, and that's when she realized the coins were moving in a familiar way. They pushed away from the pile one at a time, lining up in a neat row, as if someone or something was counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The coins continued to line up. The creature was counting them like a child, learning to make change. Slixy collected the coins closest to her and backed away slowly. She held her breath as she crossed a patch of moonlight, terrified the uninvited would notice her. When the darkness engulfed her once again, a swell of hope rose inside her. She knew the creature didn't need light to see her. It had found her in the darkness only moments ago. But the darkness provided a false sense of security, and she closed her eyes for a second to catch her breath. Tiny pinpricks crawled up her spine, and she realized her mistake. She opened her eyes and they darted to the road. The coins had stopped moving. Slixy tossed the last galleons behind her, and they landed in the patch of moonlight. As she turned to run, she caught a glimpse of a blurry form hovering over the coins, a vortex of liquid shadow, stretching to lengthen and create fingers. The creature had no eyes, just two darkened hollows above an enormous black void Slixy assumed was his mouth. Gold glimmered in the moonlight as one of the coins was pushed away from the pile. But she didn't stop to watch the uninvited count them. Slixy boom power ran, and she escaped at night. Perhaps because she had nothing left on which the creature could feed, no money, and not an ounce of greed left in her. She settled in a tiny cottage. And of course, a girl has to make a living, so Slixy did what goblins do best. She tinkered and invented something of value, at least the goblin hood. Shiny, painted gold coins that looked exactly like galleons. She stamped them with the face of the first stray prince and called them tossaways. The harrowing tale of Klex's fate spread, and every goblin who heard it rushed to the market to buy tossaways from his clever widow. The uninvited guest roams Azeroth to this day, so if you meet a penniless goblin, throw a few tossaways behind you to avoid becoming the creature's next victim. Klex Boom Powder still wanders the land as well, offering gifts to whoever will accept them. Some say that on quiet nights, you can hear an old woman's voice reciting a familiar rhyme. In dark of night and bright of day, keeping your hand a toss away. Guard your fortune, mind your greed, or else the uninvited guest will feed.